A man kneels in the dust with his hands bound behind his back. 15 warriors form a circle around him, weapons ready. The woman standing over him doesn't know she's captured the hunter's scent to map her people's location for extermination. He tracked them for 3 days, studied their patterns, memorized the canyon's weak points, the contract promised. Enough money to disappear forever. But now, staring up at her through swollen eyes, Dalton Cross understands his first miscalculation. He assumed they'd be easy to find because they were desperate. He never considered they might be surviving because they were dangerous. The rope burns cut into Dalton's wrists. He'd been following the canyon rim just after dawn when the arrow struck the ground 3 in from his boot. No warning shot fires that close. By accident, he froze, hands rising slowly, and they materialized from the rocks like they'd been part of the landscape all along. 6 of them, silent, efficient. They stripped his weapons, bound him, and forced him to walk for hours into terrain he hadn't known existed. The canyon walls rose higher with each mile, cutting off the sky, trapping the heat. His shirt clung to his back. Sweat stung the cut above his eye, where one of them had struck him with a rifle stock when he tried to speak. Now the entire clan surrounds him. Dalton counts at least 40 people, maybe more, emerging from dwellings built into the canyon walls. Children stare from behind their mothers. Old men watch with expressions that suggest they've seen this before. The warriors keep their circle tight, and he recognizes the discipline of people who fought to stay alive. This isn't a desperate band running from conflict. This is an organized community defending itself. The woman steps closer. She wears traditional clothing adorned with turquoise and bone, her long black hair braided with feathers that catch the midday light. Her eyes are dark and completely unreadable. She's younger than he expected for someone clearly in command, and the way the others defer to her suggests respect earned through more than inheritance. She speaks in her language, and one of the men translates. You've been watching us 3 days, maybe 4. Dalton's throat is raw from thirst and dust. I got lost. Wrong canyon. Her expression doesn't change, but something flickers in her eyes. She knows he's lying. She steps forward and crouches to his level, studying his face. The way he'd studied their camp from the ridge, up close, he sees the exhaustion behind her controlled exterior, faint. Scars on her forearms, calluses on her hands. This isn't someone playing at leadership. This is someone who's buried. People she loved. Lost men don't carry surveying equipment. She says in perfect English, her voice low and cold. Lost men don't sketch maps of our water sources. Lost men don't mark our patrol routes in notebooks. His stomach drops. They found everything. The detailed maps he'd been preparing for the ranchers, the schedule of guard rotations, the notes about which approaches offered cover for a large group. Everything the contractors needed to plan their assault. She stands and her shadow falls across his face. Who sent you? Dalton. Stay silent. Not from loyalty to the men who hired him, but because he's calculating, wondering if there's any version of the truth that keeps him breathing past sunset. You have until tomorrow's dawn to decide if you want to die with secrets, she says, turning to address the gathered crowd in her language. The warriors grab his arms and haul him upright. His legs nearly buckle from kneeling so long in the sun. They drag him toward one of the dwellings. Carved into the canyon wall, a young boy, maybe 12, watches from a doorway with curious eyes that haven't yet learned to hate. The woman follows at a distance, speaking quietly with an older man who keeps glancing back at Dalton with unmistakable hostility as they shove him into a small space barely larger than a storage room. Dalton catches one last glimpse of the camp spreading out below, smoke rising from cooked fires, people moving with purpose, lives being lived despite everything trying to erase them. The door closes, sealing him in darkness. His breathing echoes off stone walls. The contract letter is folded inside his boot, pressed against his ankle. If they search more thoroughly, if they find that document with its explicit instructions and payment schedule, they'll know exactly what he came here to do, And then even dawn won't save him. Darkness pressed against Dalton's eyes until he couldn't tell if they were open or closed, his shoulders act from the position they'd left him in, wrists still bound. The stone floor leached cold through his clothes despite the desert heat outside. He'd lost track of time when the door scraped open, flooding the space with harsh afternoon light. Two warriors entered first, weapons ready. Then she appeared in the doorway, backlit so he couldn't read her expression. Kiona stepped inside, and the men positioned themselves against the walls, close enough to intervene, but far enough to let her work. She held his surveying compass in one hand, turning it slowly. This is quality equipment, expensive, not something a drifter carries. Dalton's mouth was too dry to speak. She gestured, and one of the warriors handed her a canteen. She crouched and held it to his lips. He drank greedily, water running down his chin. She pulled it away before he'd had enough. The maps show 3 weeks of observation. She continued, patrol patterns, water schedules where the children play. Her voice remained steady, but something dangerous moved beneath the surface. These aren't the notes of someone lost. These are the notes of someone planning an attack. I'm a surveyor, Dalton rasped, mapping terrain for don't. The single word cut like a blade. She stood, pacing the small space. I've seen survey maps. They mark elevation and water sources. They don't mark which families sleep in which dwellings. They don't note that our eastern patrol returns at sunset. She stopped directly in front of him. You were hired to find us. That much is obvious. What I need to know is who's coming, when they're coming, and how many. Dalton met her eyes. He'd been in tight situations before, talked his way out of worse. But something about her direct gaze made the usual lies stick in his throat. She wasn't playing games. She was trying to keep her people alive. If I tell you they'll just hire someone else, he said, then you die for nothing. She tilted her head slightly. Is that loyalty or stupidity? It's knowing how this ends. He shifted, trying to ease the pressure on his shoulders. You can't win against what's coming. Best thing you can do is move before her hand moved faster than he could track. The slap cracked across his face, snapping his head sideways. His ears rang. We've been moving for 3 generations, she said quietly, each word precisely controlled. My grandfather was born in the northern mountains. My father died defending the river valley. My brother bled out in my arms protecting this canyon. Every time we move, they push harder. Tell me where running has gotten us. Blood filled Dalton's mouth where he'd bitten his cheek. He spat it onto the floor. Then why keep me alive? If you've already decided to fight, what do you need from me? I need to know if you're a scout or a distraction. She leaned down close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. I need to know if the men who hired you sent someone competent or someone expendable, because if they sent you to die drawing our attention, the real threat is already moving. The thought hadn't occurred to him. What if the ranchers expected him to get caught? What if his capture was part of the plan? Kiona straightened, reading his face. Now you're thinking. Good. She moved toward the door. You have until nightfall. Tell me who hired you and when they're coming, or I'll assume you're worthless as information and useful only as a warning to whoever finds your body. The door closed, sealing him in darkness again. But her words echoed in the small space. Not just the threat, but the question underneath it. What if he was expendable? What if the ranchers never intended for him to survive long enough to collect payment? Outside, he heard voices in conversation. The young boy from earlier spoke in rapid questions. Kiona's responses were patient but firm, teaching, not dismissing, the sound of family, not savages. Dalton pressed his head back against the stone wall. The contract in his boot felt heavier than before. Night brought cold that seeped through the stone walls. Dalton's muscles had gone from aching to numb. Through the gaps in the door, he watched firelight dance across the canyon walls. Voices carried on the still air. Not war councils or angry demands for his execution. Just the sounds of evening, someone laughing, a child being called home. The low murmur of elders sharing a meal. The door opened near midnight. The young boy from earlier entered carrying a wooden bowl and a blanket. He sat both down carefully, just out of Dalton's reach, then backed toward the door without speaking. "Wait," Dalton said. His voice came out as a croak. The boy froze, hand on the door frame. He couldn't be older than 12. All sharp angles and serious eyes that had seen too much too soon. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. "Nailish. That means something. It means I work." The boy's English was careful but clear. "My aunt says names should tell the truth about us." He glanced at the bowl. "I can't untie you." "She'd know your aunt? The woman who runs things?" Nailish nodded. "Kiona. She leads the warriors since my uncle died. Before that, she led the scouts. Before that, she learned to fight when she was younger than me." There was pride in his voice. "She's kept us alive when everyone said we'd be gone by winter." Dalton looked at the food, his stomach twisting with hunger. "Why? Bring me anything at all?" "Because Aunt says we're not like the people who come to hurt us." Nish stepped closer, studying Dalton with the same intense focus his aunt had shown. "She says if we become as cruel as them, they win even. If we survive, kid, life doesn't work like that. Being kind won't stop what's coming, maybe not. But Aunt says the moment we stop being who we are, we're already gone." He moved to the bowl and pushed it closer with his foot, close enough for Dalton to reach if he strained. "She also says you're afraid." "I'm not afraid of dying." "That's not what she means." Nish moved back to the door. "She says you're afraid of being wrong about us. That's why you won't talk." The boy slipped out before Dalton could respond. The door closed but didn't latch completely. Through the gap, he watched Nalnish return to a fire where several families gathered. An older woman pulled him close, checking that he was unharmed. Kiona stood apart from the group, arms crossed, watching the same fire. Dalton twisted until he could reach the bowl. The effort sent fresh pain through his shoulders. Stew still warm, simple, but carefully made. He ate slowly, each bite a reminder that these people were surviving on limited resources but still fed a prisoner. The contract in his boot pressed against his shin. He'd memorized every word. Payment on delivery of maps, bonus for confirming numbers and defenses. Final installment upon successful removal of the clan. That last phrase had seemed clean on paper. Removal, like they were relocating livestock instead of planning to drive families from their homes. Or worse. Dalton finished the stew and set the bowl down through the door gap. Watched Nalnish laugh at something an older boy said. Watched Kiona correct a young warrior's stance during what looked like training. Watched people who were supposed to be his targets living lives that looked nothing like what the ranchers had described. The Eastern Guard patrol passed his door. He recognized their rhythm. Now, every 4 hours, 3-person rotation. The gap between shifts lasted exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes, when the Eastern approach was vulnerable. That information alone was worth half his payment. His fingers found the edge of the contract through the leather of his boot. If they searched him again, if they found it, with its explicit language and payment schedule, there would be no more questions, no more chances to choose which truth to tell. Outside, Nailish laugh carried across the canyon one more time before someone called the children to sleep. Dawn brought Kiona back with 2 warriors. They hauled Dalton into the open air where morning light made his eyes water after the darkness. His legs buckled when they cut the ropes on his ankles. He collapsed, muscles screaming as blood flow returned. "Get up," Kiona ordered. Dalton struggled to his feet, swaying. She studied him with that same measuring look, then gestured to the warriors. They retied his hands in front instead of behind, loose enough to allow circulation. One hand in the canteen, he drank carefully this time, knowing better than to waste the water. "You're going to work," she said. "We have limited resources and too many mouths. Even prisoners contribute." They led him to where several people were repairing damage to the canyon wall. Dwellings, winter storms had weakened the structures. An older man directed the work, pointing to weak spots that needed reinforcement. Dalton was given simple tasks, moving stones, holding beams while others secured them, manual labor under constant guard. But the work put him in the center of daily life. He watched how they organized, how younger warriors deferred to experienced ones, not through fear but respect, how Decisions were discussed among elders before Kiona made final choices. How scarce supplies were distributed fairly. With children and elderly receiving priority, Nal Nish appeared midday with food, flatbread, and dried meat. The same ration everyone else received. The boy sat on a nearby rock while Dalton ate, watching with that intense curiosity. Why do you do this work? Nish asked. Hunting people, Dalton chewed. Slowly, no one had asked him that directly before. Money? That's not a reason. That's what you get. Why do you? Need it to disappear? Start over somewhere. Nobody knows my name. What did you do that was so bad you need to hide? The question hit harder than Kiona's slap. Dalton looked at the boy, seeing genuine curiosity, not judgment. I made choices I thought were smart. Turned out they just made me useful to people who needed someone without a conscience. You could choose different now, kid. It's not that simple. Aunt says the hard part isn't choosing different. The hard part is living with what you chose before. Nalnish stood, dusting off his clothes. She also says, you're almost out of time. That afternoon, Dalton noticed increased activity, warriors checking weapons, scouts returning with urgent reports. Kiona gathered her council near the canyon's eastern rim, pointing toward distant ridges. Her expression had shifted from controlled calm to barely contained tension. One of the guards moved closer to hear the discussion. Dalton caught fragments. Riders spotted. 3 days out, maybe 2. Large group, well-armed. The timeline matched what the ranchers had told him. They were coming. Kiona caught him watching. She approached, dismissing the guards with a gesture. For a moment, they stood alone among the busy preparations. Your employers are moving faster than expected, she said quietly. Which means either you gave them better information than I thought, or they don't care about your survival. Probably both, she studied his face. You've been watching us for 2 days now. Seeing how we live, does it change anything? Dalton met her eyes. The ranchers had called them savages, obstacles to progress, threats to expansion, but he'd watched these people share scarce food, teach their children, care for their elders, laugh despite everything trying to crush them. I don't know. He said honestly, that's the first true thing you've said to me. She stepped closer. The attack comes in 2 days, maybe less if you know something. That helps us survive. This is your last chance to matter for something besides money. She turned to leave. Dalton's voice stopped her. The eastern canyon, they'll come at dawn when the light is behind them. 30 men, maybe more. They have rifles and enough ammunition for a sustained fight. Kiona went very still. Why tell me now? Because that kid asked me why I do this work, and I didn't have a good answer. Dalton looked toward where Nile Nish played with other children, their laughter carrying across stone walls. Maybe I'm tired of not having one. Kiona's expression remained unreadable. If you're lying, if this is misdirection, it's not. They're coming from the east at dawn. That's the truth. She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for deception. Whatever she saw made her nod once, sharp and decisive. She called for her council, already planning defense as warriors mobilized around him. Dalton felt the weight in his boots shift. The contract still pressed against his skin. He'd given them information that might save lives, but if they found that document with its payment structure and explicit instructions, they'd know he'd been paid to ensure their destruction. And truth without trust is just another kind of lie. Preparations consumed the camp through the afternoon. Warriors moved with practiced efficiency, positioning themselves along defensive points Dalton recognized from his own surveillance. Kiona directed placements with calm authority, adjusting positions based on terrain advantages he'd noted in his maps. She was using his information, trusting it. The guilt sat heavy in his chest. As sunset painted the canyon walls orange, they moved him back to the holding space. 2 guards secured him to a support beam this time, giving him enough slack to sit, but not move freely. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, checked the rope work with particular care. You told her about the eastern approach, the man said in heavily accented English. Why? Dalton shrugged as much as the ropes allowed. Maybe I'm tired of being on the wrong side. Maybe you lie. The warrior's eyes were hard. Maybe you tell truth about East, so we ignore West. Maybe you kill us all with your words. The man left before Dalton could respond. The accusation stung because it was exactly what a smart tactician would do: feed them real information to build false confidence, then exploit the trap. How? Did Kiona know he wasn't doing exactly that? Nish appeared as darkness fell, carrying water and food, the boy's usual. Curiosity had shifted to something more cautious. He set the bowl down, then hesitated. "What is it?" Dalton asked. "Your boot." Nish pointed. "Something fell out when they moved you. I found it." Cold dread flooded through Dalton's body. "What did you find?" The boy pulled folded papers from his shirt. Even in the dim light, Dalton recognized the contract. Nish's young face was troubled. "I can't read all the words, but I see numbers. I see our clan's name. I see your name with payment amounts. Kid, listen, you were paid to help them find us." Nish's voice cracked. "You were paid to help them kill us." "I was, but it needs to see this." The boy backed toward the door, papers clutched in both hands. "Nish, wait, please." But the boy was already running. Dalton could hear him calling for Kiona, voice high with betrayal and fear. Within minutes, the entire camp would know. Within minutes, whatever fragile trust he'd built would shatter. The wait felt endless when Kiona finally entered. Her face was carved from stone. She held the contract, and behind her stood every warrior in camp. Their weapons were drawn. The scarred man from earlier looked ready to use his blade immediately. Kiona read aloud, her voice steady despite the fury beneath it. Payment upon delivery of detailed maps. Bonus for confirmation of numbers and defensive positions. Final payment upon successful removal of clan. She looked up. Removal. That's the word they use. Like we're weeds in their garden. Kiona, you knew. She stepped closer when you sat with us, when you ate our food, when Nalnish brought you water. You knew you'd been paid to help destroy us. Yes. The admission hung in the air. Someone behind her spat in disgust. The scarred warrior moved forward, drawing a long blade. Kiona raised her hand, stopping him. "I gave you information that could save your people," Dalton said. Words rushing out. The eastern approach, the timing, the numbers, information a spy gives to seem valuable. She crouched to his level, and her eyes held something worse than anger, disappointment. "You told me just enough to buy time, just enough to seem reformed, and I believed you." She stood, drawing her own blade. The steel caught firelight as she pressed it against his throat. The canyon fell silent except for distant wind and his own breathing. "Give me one reason," she said quietly. "One reason I shouldn't end this now." Dalton felt the blade's edge sharp enough to part skin with the slightest pressure. His mind raced through everything he'd observed, everything he knew that might matter. Then it hit him, the western ridge. He said quickly, "There's a secondary group, smaller force. They're supposed to move in after the main assault draws your warriors east. They'll target the dwellings where your children and elders shelter." Kiona's hand didn't move, but something flickered in her expression. "You're lying. I'm not. It's in my notes. The ones you found, page 7, northwest coordinates with a different timeline." His words came faster. "The ranchers know you're competent. They plan for you to defend successfully against the main force. The secondary group is meant to ensure you lose, even if you win." She gestured, and someone brought the notebook. Another warrior held a torch close while they found the page. Dalton watched Kiona's face as she read, saw the moment she understood he was telling the truth. "How many in the second group?" She demanded. 8 to 10. "They'll wait for battle sounds, then move on the western shelter caves." The blade pressed harder against his throat. "You knew this. You knew they planned to target children specifically, and you took their money anyway. Yes, there was no defense for it. And now I'm telling you, so you can stop it." Kiona held the blade steady, her hand not trembling at all. Behind her, warriors waited for the order. Nish watched with tears on his face, betrayed by someone he'd shown kindness. The entire camp balanced on her decision. Finally, she lowered the blade, put him back in the holding space, post-triple guard. She turned to her council. "We need warriors on the western ridge by midnight." As they dragged him away, Dalton heard her quiet voice. If he's wrong about this, he dies. If he's right, he still might. He doesn't get to buy redemption with one truth after so many lies. The door closed on darkness again, but this time Dalton knew dawn might not come. Darkness gave way to gray pre-dawn light. Dalton sat bound to the support beam, listening to controlled chaos. Outside, warriors moved into positions. Families retreated to interior caves. Children's voices were hushed by nervous parents. The camp prepared for battle based on information he'd provided, trusting intelligence from a man who'd been paid to destroy them. The scarred warrior entered with two others. They cut Dalton's bonds and hauled him to his feet. His legs were stiff from hours of immobility. "Where are you taking me?" he asked. "Keona's orders. You watch what your information causes." They dragged him to a position on the eastern rim where Keona stood with her best warriors. From here, the canyon's main approach was visible. Dawn light slowly revealed the landscape. Nothing moved in the pale morning. "If you're wrong," Keona said without looking at him, "you die badly. If you're right, and we lose anyway, you die quickly. Those are your options." Dalton scanned the ridge. "They'll wait for full light. Another 20 minutes, and the Western group, they won't move until they hear fighting. Your people in position there. 6 of our best warriors are on the Western ridge." She finally looked at him. "If you've sent them into a trap, if there's no secondary force, those 6 won't be here to defend the main approach." The weight of that decision pressed down on them both. Dalton had divided her forces based on information only he possessed. If he was wrong, if he was still working the contract, this was how he'd ensure their defeat. Movement caught his eye, a glint of metal on the distant ridge, then another rider's emerging from cover. Forming up, he counted quickly, 28 visible, more might be in reserve. "There," he said quietly. Keona raised her hand. Her warriors tensed, weapons ready. The attackers advanced slowly, expecting surprise. They didn't know the clan had been warned. They didn't know defensive positions had been reinforced overnight. The lead riders reached the canyon's narrow entrance. Keona waited, letting them commit, letting more enter the kill zone. Her discipline was extraordinary. Every instinct probably screamed to attack immediately, but she held. When half the force had entered, she dropped her hand. The canyon erupted. Warriors hidden and elevated positions fired on the clustered attackers. The narrow space became chaos. Horses screamed and reared. Men scrambled for cover that didn't exist. The ranchers had expected terrified families fleeing deeper into the canyon. Instead, they faced organized resistance from fighters who'd known they were coming. Dalton watched the battle unfold. Exactly as he'd predicted, the attackers' advantage of surprise was gone. Their numbers meant less in the confined space. Keona's people fought with desperate precision, protecting their home against men who'd come to take everything. A bullet struck near Dalton's position, spraying rock fragments. The guards shoved him down, using their bodies to shield him. It took him a moment to understand why they'd protect their prisoner. They needed him alive to verify whether the Western threat was real. The main assault lasted less than an hour. The ranchers' force broke under sustained defense, retreating with heavy losses. Wounded men limped or were carried back toward their horses. Keona didn't pursue. She'd achieved the objective, turn them back, make the cost too high. But her face remained tense as she listened to the fading sounds of retreat. The real test was still coming. If Dalton had told the truth, a secondary force was moving toward the western caves right now, targeting the families they'd thought were safe. She grabbed Dalton's shirt, pulling him close. "If you've killed our children, if this was all manipulation to divide our forces, I will make your last hours last days." Before he could respond, a runner appeared from the western ridge, young, breathless, eyes wide with adrenaline. "Commander, the Western group, 8 riders." They attempted approach just after the main assault began. The young warrior's voice shook with relief. "Our warriors were in position. We turned them back before they reached the caves." The tension in Keona's shoulders released slightly. She turned to Dalton, studying him with new calculation. "You told the truth about all of it." "I told The truth too late, Dalton said. That doesn't make it redemption. Shouts erupted from the eastern approach. The scarred warrior ran toward them, pointing. They're regrouping. They're coming back with everyone. Dalton looked and felt his blood go cold. The ranchers hadn't retreated. They'd pulled back to combine both forces. Now more than 30 armed men were forming up for a second assault. This time, with no surprise, no divided strength, just overwhelming numbers against exhausted defenders. They're going to rush us, Dalton said. All at once. They know your positions now. They'll accept losses to push through. Keona's mind worked rapidly, reassessing defenses, counting remaining ammunition. We can't hold against that. Not with the ammunition we've already spent. The attackers began their advance, determined, angry, coming to finish what they'd started. Dalton looked at the warriors around him, preparing to defend their home against impossible odds. He looked at Keona, this woman who'd kept her people alive through will and sacrifice. He thought of Nalnish, whose trust he'd betrayed, but who'd shown him what actual courage looked like. He turned to the scarred warrior. Cut me loose, Commander. The man looked to Kona for orders. Dalton met her eyes. Cut me loose and give me a weapon. Let me stand with you, Keona. Searched his face for deception, for angles, for any hint of the man who'd taken blood money to map her people for destruction. Whatever she saw made her nod once. Cut him free. The ropes fell away from Dalton's wrists. Blood rushed back into his hands with painful intensity. The scarred warrior handed him a rifle, watching with clear distrust. Around them, warriors took defensive positions as the combined force of attackers approached. Dalton checked the weapon's load. 6 rounds. He'd killed men for less cause with more ammunition. Today, he'd try to save people with almost nothing. You know these men, Keona said, positioning herself beside him. You know how they think. They'll focus fire on your strongest positions first. Try to suppress them while others rush the flanks. He pointed to a gap in the defensive line. That weakness there. They'll exploit it. Keona called orders in her language. Warriors shifted to cover the gap. She'd listened. She'd trusted his tactical knowledge despite everything. The weight of that trust settled over him like physical pressure. The attackers came hard and fast. No probing, no strategy, pure aggression. Meant to overwhelm through numbers. Bullets struck rock around defensive positions. Warriors returned fire with disciplined precision, making each shot count. Dalton sighted down the rifle. A man in a gray vest charged toward Nalish position where the boy crouched behind his aunt's protective stance. Dalton's finger found the trigger. The weapon kicked against his shoulder. The man in gray went down, clutching his leg. Not a death shot, just enough to stop the threat. He fired again, dropping another attacker who'd gained the canyon wall around him. And Keona's warriors fought with controlled fury. They weren't trying to kill everyone. They were trying to make the cost unbearable, to break the will of men fighting for money against people, fighting for survival. The scarred warrior took a bullet through his shoulder, spinning him backward. Dalton grabbed him before he fell, dragging him to cover. The man's eyes went wide, shocked that the prisoner had saved him. Dalton pressed cloth against the wound and returned to his position. Through the chaos, he spotted the problem. 3 attackers had broken through on the southern approach, moving toward where families sheltered in the caves. Warriors were too engaged on other fronts to intercept. Dalton ran, no thought, no calculation, just the knowledge that Nalnish and others like him were in that direction. He had 2 rounds left. The 3 men didn't see him coming until too late. He fired both remaining shots, dropped one attacker, wounded another. The 3rd turned on him. No ammunition, no options. Dalton threw the empty rifle and charged. They collided hard, both going down in a tangle of limbs. The man was younger, fresher, not exhausted from days of captivity. His fist connected with Dalton's jaw, snapping his head sideways. Stars burst across his vision. Dalton fought anyway, desperate, ugly, nothing like the clean violence he'd once practiced. He fought like the people around him fought, like someone who had something worth protecting. The attacker pulled a knife. Dalton caught his wrist, holding the blade inches from his throat. Then Keona was there, blade flashing in morning light. The attacker fell. She hauled Dalton to his feet, breathing hard. Blood streaked her face. Not all of it hers. Stay close, she ordered. The battle raged around them. But something had shifted. The attacker's momentum was breaking against organized defense. Men who'd expected easy victory faced people who refused to die quietly. The cost was becoming too high. A horn sounded from the ridge, the retreat signal. Attackers began pulling back, dragging wounded with them. This time, the withdrawal was real, permanent. They'd lost too much for money that suddenly seemed less important than survival. Kiona didn't pursue. She stood at the canyon's edge, weapon ready, watching them go. Around her, warriors tended wounded, checked ammunition, maintained vigilance. They'd won, but the cost was written on every exhausted face. Dalton sank to his knees, spent. His body screamed with pain from wounds he hadn't noticed during the fight. The scarred warrior approached, arm bound, expression complex. "You fought with us," the man said simply. "I did." Nish appeared through the settling dust, eyes searching until they found Dalton. The boy's face was strewn with tears and dirt. He didn't say anything, just stood there looking at the man who'd been sent to help destroy his family, but instead had bled defending it. Kiona walked over, each step measured. She looked down at Dalton with an expression he couldn't read. The battle was over. The immediate threat was gone. Now came the harder question: what to do with a man who'd started as their executioner and ended as their defender? "Can you stand?" she asked. Dalton managed to get to his feet, swaying. Kiona studied him for a long moment. The entire camp watched, waiting for her judgment. "Come with me," she said quietly. "We need to talk about what happens now." Kiona led Dalton away from the gathered clan to a place where the canyon walls opened toward distant plains. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of battle smoke. Behind them, people tended wounds and began repairs, life continuing despite everything that had tried to stop it. She stood silent for a long moment, looking at the horizon. The ranchers will send someone else eventually, maybe not this season, maybe not next, but they won't stop wanting this land, no. Dalton agreed. They won't. You could tell us where to find them, names, locations. We could strike first. You could, but that would make you what they are, and you'd lose what makes you worth defending. Kiona turned to face him. "Fully, you fought well today, saved lives, that matters." She paused, but it doesn't erase what you came here to do. It doesn't balance against the fact that you took money to help destroy families. "I know some of my people want you dead anyway. They say one good day doesn't buy forgiveness for planning genocide." Her eyes held his. "Others say you've proven yourself, that actions in crisis reveal true character." Dalton looked back toward the camp where Nalnish helped an elder walk toward shelter. "What do you say?" "I say you can't stay here. Your presence divides us when we need unity. Some will always see the man who was paid to hunt us. Others will see the man who bled defending us. Both are true, and that makes you dangerous to our peace." The words landed with finality, not execution, but exile, honest and fair in a way that made his chest tight. But Kiona continued, "You also can't go back to who you were. The ranchers know you failed them. Worse, you fought against them. If you return to your old life, you're a dead man. They'll assume you betrayed them from the start. So what do I do?" She held out a small leather pouch. He opened it to find dried meat, basic supplies, and something else, his contract torn into pieces. "You disappear truly this time, not to hide from consequences, but to become someone who doesn't need to." Dalton closed his fist around the pouch. "That's simple. Nothing about this is simple. You'll carry what you almost did for the rest of your life. That's appropriate." She looked toward where her people worked to rebuild, "but you'll also carry the knowledge that when it mattered, when the choice was real, you chose differently. That has to be worth something." The scarred warrior approached, arm bound but standing straight. He handed Dalton a water skin and a worn blanket. No words, but the gesture spoke clearly. Recognition, if not forgiveness. Nalnish appeared last, running up the path. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the boy stepped forward and held out his hand. Dalton took it, feeling the firm grip of someone who understood that people were complicated, that mistakes could be massive, and that choosing better still mattered even when it came too late. "Don't waste it," Nalnish said simply. "I won't." Kiona pointed toward the western pass. "That way lead to settlements where no one knows your name. What you build there is your choice." Dalton shouldered the supplies and turned toward the path. He walked without looking back, each step taking him farther from the man who'd accepted blood money without question. The sun beat down on his shoulders, his wounds ached with each movement. Exhaustion pulled at his legs, but he kept walking. Behind him, the camp slowly returned to life. Children's laughter rose again. Elders shared food around cook fires. Warriors stood watch, protecting people who'd proven that survival wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about knowing what you'd fight for when everything was at stake. Dalton Cross had come to this canyon as a hunter, paid to ensure a community's destruction. He left as a man who'd bled defending them. Neither version erased the other. Both would follow him wherever he went. But at least now, when he closed his eyes at night, he'd see Nalish's living face, instead of the ghost of what he'd almost helped accomplish. That wasn't redemption. Redemption couldn't be earned in a day, no matter how much blood you shed in the right direction. But it was a beginning. The canyon walls rose behind him one last time before the path curved and they disappeared from view. Dalton adjusted his grip on the supplies and kept walking toward an uncertain future that was entirely his to shape for the first time in years. The weight of that freedom felt less like burden and more like possibility. The wind carried sounds of the camp for a few more miles, then faded into the vast silence of empty land. Dalton walked until sunset, made camp, and slept without dreams. When he woke the next morning, he continued west toward places where his name meant nothing, and his past was as to outrun or outlive. Either way, he'd do it without taking money to hunt people who'd done nothing, except refuse to disappear. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and fate collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything too.